Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of Spartan Ownership. And today I have a guest that I've been following for a very long time now, since I was like 16 or 17, actually, Adam Kokesh. And he's done some pretty amazing things when it comes to politics and helping this country move towards a more free and independent and just beautiful vision. And I really appreciate what he's doing. He's done some pretty ballsy stuff, and I'm kind of speechless, to be honest, right now, and a little bit nervous actually, because you're probably one of my more high profile guests. I've had some other guests that are pretty high profile, but you're probably a little bit more so. And we're gonna get into some things here, stuff that's gonna help you guys arm yourselves with the knowledge necessary to take action and help this country move towards a better and more free state. So, Adam, can you kind of introduce yourself, tell the people what you're about, and then we'll jump into the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Max. I really appreciate that. And I got to say, having gone from independent media to where I am now, focusing more on this political campaign and my book and getting the message out in general, it's really awesome to know that from when I got started in independent media, when you were 16, 17 years old, now there are people like you who are taking up the torch, who are doing all of the hard work and interviewing me instead of the other way around. And it's beautiful to see that my work has affected you in such a way that's got you doing something useful and productive and meaningful that obviously you enjoy. So I got to say thank you for that. I really appreciate this. And there is kind of a coming full circle element to this interview. So I really appreciate that. And in line with the spirit of what you do with your podcast, I'll start with the sort of self-improvement note about what comes with my message, the understanding of freedom. And a lot of people mistakenly think of this as a political message. It's not. It is the anti-political message. True libertarianism based on the ideals of freedom is self-ownership. You own yourself. I mean, very important concept. Like, how can you improve yourself if you don't own yourself? If you're a slave, slaves don't, do self-improvement training when they're going to be working for someone else as much as when they're working for themselves. And I think asserting that, understanding that philosophically is critical. And I'm sure you've incorporated that into the message that you put out. To me, this is the foundation of the anti-political message. And when you understand that you own yourself, the implication is that government is unethical. It's a form of slavery. It represents some claim over you. If I'm government and I can tax your income, well, either I'm stealing from you or I own you, and there's really no way around it. So I focus on the political implications of that self-ownership philosophy. In terms of self-improvement, there are a lot of important elements, and it's not so much active stuff, self-improvement that you do based on this, but having an understanding of this as you go about the rest of your life in its crudest form. I mean, back when I was doing Adam versus the Man, I used to say, living like government doesn't exist and loving it. And obviously, if government didn't exist, we'd all be having a lot more fun, certainly. But in a practical way, when it comes to interacting with government, understanding that you don't have any ethical obligation to go along with the current system. It is unethical. It acts like it owns you. It is based on this premise that is false, that government has some legitimate authority. It does not. It is an illegitimate authority based on the illusion of public consent. And so when you understand this, when it comes to paying taxes, you don't go, oh, well, I gotta orient my life so that I can pay my taxes properly and contribute to the evils of government, my fair share, as opposed to just understanding these are people who are trying to rip you off to line their pockets and the pockets of their sponsors. It liberates you from that restricted thinking. I don't think that anybody is able to fully actualize themselves without an understanding of self-ownership and understanding that government exists in contradiction to that. Then you get it down to the more immediate stuff, the practical lifestyle stuff that comes with this. First is the economic, going galt in the Ayn Randian sense, withdrawing your economic support for the state, or as Sam Konkin III called it, agorism or agorism, as counter-economics, not paying taxes, working under the table, all these things that give you an edge in business. The main takeaway at that might be, don't feel bad about not paying your taxes. Don't feel bad about avoiding a thief. Don't feel bad about escaping slavery in your own life. And when you get that kind of emotional freedom, which is another important part of my message, then you get to live more free. And so the next thing is that the day-to-day interactions with the state become significantly different. That when you talk to police, it's just a dude in a blue costume who's got some training and a gun and responds to these incentives. That means anytime you're talking to a cop, you're likely to get yourself in trouble or shot. So do as little of it as possible. Or when you do talk to police, understand this so that you can assert your rights appropriately. And the most important one I can tell you all right now, you don't need to learn anything else. If you're ever talking to a police officer, just know that you can always walk away unless you are being detained because they have some specific probable cause to use against you. So if a cop stops you on the street and says, hey, hold on, where are you going there? You smell like weed, or I saw you with this other thing, and we need to stop and we need to talk to you. And a lot of guys just like choke up in that situation. Oh, well, crap, I'm talking to a cop. Well, I better cooperate. And if you don't have a lot of experience talking to cops, the best thing is always to say as little as possible, right? Because cops are trained to get you talking, to get you to incriminate yourself so that they have an excuse to arrest you. But in order to detain you in that on the street, hey, I just want to talk to you scenario, you can always say, excuse me, officer, am I free to go? Am I free to go? Most important 5 words in dealing with the state. Because if you can walk away, you're not being detained, you're not under arrest, you have that freedom, and you should assert it unless you have something that you need to go to the cops for help with. But that's also generally a bad idea too. So if they say, yes, you're being detained, then you can say, hey, what reasonable suspicion do you have that I'm committing a specific crime? And if they can't articulate it, you can actually walk away. Doesn't mean they can't chase you down and shoot you if they feel like it, but understand the mind games that they play in order to assert your own rights. So obviously there's some other implications for this lifestyle-wise in terms of interacting with the state, but those are the highlights. Those are the most important things. And as for my role in this, what I'm doing to help move humanity forward to live more free so we don't have to deal with this is that I'm getting ready to run for president in 2020 on the platform of the peaceful, orderly, responsible dissolution of the entire United States federal government. What I am doing with this campaign is turning the United States presidential election process into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. And traveling the country right now, we're on a 68-city tour. It's been amazing, and you would be shocked how receptive the average American is to this because they realize we're too good for this government. Something is fundamentally wrong here, first of all. Philosophically, I think in the age of the internet, most people understand we don't have to be united under one government to be united in American values. And if anything, forcing everybody into this one-size-fits-all solution is un-American. And this is where we have an incredible opportunity to, once again, lead the world forward in freedom as Americans. And as our founders did, overthrow the biggest empire the world had ever known. And as we're putting in all the hashtags, finally free America.
That's epic. So much information in there. Notably, the fact that you're going to run for president, that is freaking badass. And it shows that it's very inspiring because, like I said, I remember seeing your content back when it was in its infancy to some extent. And now to take it up to such an exponential degree is very inspiring and shows that we truly do have power. And I feel like we've been conditioned to believe that we don't. Slavery.
Yeah, if I may get back to that, dude, there's something important that I forgot in that intro then, because that is absolutely critical. And you want to talk about self-actualization, is getting over the emotional conditioning that the state imposes on you through government schools. And you know that one of the most important things that government schools try to do to you is get you to be a cog in the machine. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to break out of that one way or another. And it helps. I mean, most people don't need to recognize it to break free, but it really helps to see it and understand why they're trying to condition you to go along with the program and accept a happy little wage slave job where you pay a lot in taxes as opposed to take charge of your life as an entrepreneur.
Yes, it's so true. And the conditioning is so deep. I mean, I've been trying out various entrepreneurial ventures, and I feel so much resistance and so much just conditioning that tells me to take the easy path, do the sure thing, go for certainty, don't take risks, don't think outside the box. And it's crazy to just notice my own conditioning, and I'm breaking out of it, and it's tough. And I can't imagine some of these other people that, you know, it's just like I've read so many books. I've interviewed guys, you know, like Navy SEALs or other entrepreneurs or other types of people that are like high performance guys. And now I'm interviewing you, and I'm still having some resistance and issues. So I can imagine the people that aren't doing this, they're just like living in a alternate reality. You know, the Matrix is a good example.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, especially in the military. You know, the conditioning works. Like, that's why they do it. Propaganda works. That's why they do it. No kidding. And I'm really glad you pointed that out, because you're so right that there's a lot of stuff we don't even notice the effect of until somebody points it out to us, or something catches our eye and we go, oh crap, I was doing that because they taught me that in middle school. Like, you know, the Pledge Allegiance, you know, salute the flag, all the stuff we do in the military, you know, all the song and dance and rituals of the state. But it's you're right, it's that like the deeper level. And when you're going to make important life decisions, you go, well, should I go to school or should I get a job? You know, and I know this is sort of a cliche, simple one, right? But that's they want, am I going to college or am I going to get a job? Like that's like the American channels. But, you know, there are literally a million other things you could do that aren't either of those two things in terms of what you want to do with your life. Be an entrepreneur, go travel the world, go work on a farm, you know, most of which would probably be better than going to school or going to get a job.
Totally. And you're actually part of the reason why I didn't end up joining the military. Because my whole life, all I wanted to do was be in the Marines. You know, ever since I was like 7 years old, that's all I thought about. That's all I talked about with my friends. We would always be like, oh, when we're going to be in the Marines. But then when I was 17 or whatever, 16, and I encountered your videos, and then I saw the one about why you shouldn't join the military, it kind of like broke that intent, I guess. And I was like, shit, now I don't know what to do anymore. So I went through like a really long, confused period. And I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. I was like, holy shit, this whole time I wanted to be in the military. Now I'm not going to join it because I just don't trust the government at all. I don't think they have my best interests in mind, nor do they have the best interests of the people in mind. So I went through this whole confusion phase, and for a long time I've been trying to figure out, and this is kind of a question to you now, what can men do in order to embody the virtues of, you know, mental toughness, strength, the ability to defend yourself, and all those kinds of things? How do you embody those virtues in ways that are alternative to the military? Because the military does provide that immersive experience. How would you go about doing it in like a less, obviously not in the military?
Yeah, so man, I hear you say that. I want to break down so many points for your audience here because that's so important. You cover a lot of ground with that too. And you made me think too about like what is the military when you talk about like becoming an alpha? Like I say, be the alpha of your own life, right? You know, whether you're an alpha male or whatever, people have different things associated with that, and I don't want to get into those definitions. But be the alpha of your own life. Be the one in charge of your destiny. I think that is, regardless of your gender, that is paramount to living well. And the military is sold to us. And like you mentioned, the experience in high school, I'll bet you the recruiters, you know, they make you register for selective service so they can send you propaganda in the mail, get your free backpack, your free pen and stickers and blah, 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 and all that crap. And they want you to believe that we're the Marine Corps, we're the tough team. And it's true that in some ways the challenge toughens you up. Like, yeah, you could go, you know, be a slave in some third world country if you want. That would toughen you up too. You know, there are a lot of better things to do than subject yourself to pain or discomfort because it's going to toughen you up. But this thing about it's going to make you the alpha. No, it makes you somebody's bitch, like as much as possible. Like, what is the militarism? They want you to think, oh, it's the army of alpha male Americans coming together to protect all the kinfolk and the fatherland and the motherland and all the ladies back. And it's like, no, bullshit. What the military represents is like one alpha male or maybe a handful at the top. And I'm not even talking about the president or the generals. I'm talking about the Rockefellers, the Warbucks, the string pullers, well, you want to say the Bushes? Yeah. They had a lot of tie-ins with the military-industrial complex and war profiteering as well. But you are not the alpha. You are the beta in this situation. You are falling for someone else's game where poor men die to line rich men's pockets. War has always been that racket. And I think it's really important if you're talking about this from a male maximization effect here. Joining the military makes you somebody's bitch. It means you are putting your life, your destiny, control of that in somebody else's hands. There are some masculine things that go with that. There is, yes, you get firearms training. Yes, you get physical fitness training. Yes, you get discipline. Yeah, you get some of these small superficial things that you will get better, unquestionably, from other sources than the military. Now, this gets to the next point I wanted to make in regards to this, the bigger worldview that I think is the important background understanding to making that decision, again, with a proper moral understanding of how the world works. The military does not make us safer. And like in my presidential campaign, talking about dissolving the federal government, yeah, we're going to leave 50 states with independent militaries in a way that hopefully they'll be able to transition very quickly into militias. But that the idea that having a military makes us safe, people say, well, Adam, who's going to keep us safe without a military? And you cannot answer that question directly because it is a nonsense question based on a false premise. Having a military makes us less safe. This is why the American founders were against the idea of a standing army entirely. They knew that a militia was the only legitimate defense of a free people, that the military represents the government's monopoly version of that, and that you have the same consequences as with every monopoly. And I don't mean when I say the military makes us less safe, just in the superficial sense, like I experienced in the global war on terror, where we literally made enemies faster than we could kill them, because that's how it's designed, that's how it's engineered. And it's more, in order to understand this, you have to understand the big lie that we've been told from birth without it even being explained about war. We are taught that wars are fought between countries. It was America versus Japan versus Germany versus China versus Russia, whatever. And it's bullshit. You just think about that for a second. You understand what government is. It's a protection racket. You understand what wars are and how they happen. Governments will always make as much war as they can get away with. That is inherent to the government racket. We happen to be living in the most peaceful times in human history. It's getting harder for them to lie to us into war the way they used to be able to. But now it's kind of impossible. The best they can get away with is these little proxy wars, which are still evil. They're still destructive. I tortured people in Iraq in 2004. You see what's going on in Syria, fueled by money behind the scenes from the CIA, the State Department, all these other American agencies that are fueling that conflict for both sides because they want the arms to be sold. They want the destruction. They want the excuse to continue the government racket. And when you fall for that, when you enlist in the military, you're being a beta. You know, you might be masculine in these superficial ways, but no, sorry, you're being feminized to being part of a collective and to be following orders. Joining the military is a feminizing thing. It feminizes you in a deep, deep, severe mental way that you have to overcome, that I've overcome in getting out. A lot of guys come out of the military with some great assertiveness, but in order to be entrepreneurs, you have to take a whole other mindset to break out of that military mentality. But more importantly, you don't have any obligation to participate or support the system. In fact, if you are, to use their cliche terms, if you're a red-blooded American male who loves freedom, then the most important thing you can do is oppose militarism every chance you get, because the American founders knew that the only legitimate defense of a free people is a well-armed population that refuses to be governed by anyone, not a military run by a government controlled by politicians and their special interests who want to make you their bitch.
Wow, thank you for that. And that brings me 2 points I wanted to run across you. I have like a notepad here that I take little notes on as you write. As you talk. And the first thing I want to say is the takeaway I got, which is that the military in a sense, feminizes you. And I never thought of it that way. And it's very enlightening because it's true. I mean, you get in there and you're actually not taking ownership over your life in any way. I mean, you put it really well when you said that it gives you masculine energy in terms of superficialities, like, oh, you become more assertive and maybe more courageous and things like that. But on a deeper level, it feminizes you because it collectivizes you and kind of puts you as like a sheep. And ultimately, you're not the shepherd, you're the sheep.
And they make you shave your facial hair. That should be enough of a sign right there. Never join an organization that does not let you wear a beard.
Oh, man, that's so true. You're making me want to get a beard, but it's still kind of patchy. The second thing I wanted to say was that, and this is an idea that I've heard various people say, and I'm sure you've thought about it on some level, obviously. Do you think that a good way to create more freedom from within the country is to start like almost like underground tribes or networks of people that live a more off-grid lifestyle?
You know, I wonder sometimes how much that phenomenon that we're seeing right now, is going to have a bigger effect. Because like I live off grid. I bought 10 acres in Arizona. I live completely off grid in a wonderful community where everybody's off grid and they generally live free. They share these values. They live this lifestyle. And, we see people in the age of the internet forming local groups, affiliations with all sorts of different people. You have now, Cell 411 if you want to have, a special emergency response kind of group in your community. There's all sorts of alternatives. But in terms of what is the ultimate effect of that, like I think that's more of an effect rather than the cause. And I think the cause is this bigger paradigm shift that people are experiencing in the age of the internet, of not needing central authority, of decentralization in general. And so obviously, that the federal government in many ways is holding back this progress, not just with taxation, the bigger framework, but lots of specific regulations. And you look at local regulations, in some places it's illegal to collect rainwater in America. And you're like, what is this? What is this? There's so many un-American, like just you look at America, honestly, you go, holy crap, we're full of just shockingly un-American things that are like accepted by everybody. It's mind-blowing when you're able to step back and see it that way. But I think there's a bigger shift happening. Because of the internet, we are no longer bound by tradition the way that we used to be. And I think people look at government and look at the world differently with a greater expectation that government's going to serve their needs. That like, why can't we have it? Why can't everybody get what they want? Again, the localization strategy, it's the everybody gets what they want in their community when we get government down to the community level. So what I'm focused on with my campaign, of course, is looking at how is there this trend at the fringe, and I don't mean fringe in a way to demean it, but even the going off grid thing it's not by definition it's not mainstream, right? It's a fringe movement. I don't know if I take offense to referring to my own participation in this as fringe, but I look at what is the mainstream thinking and how is that shifting. And I think the most important things are that Americans are realizing we're too good for this government. We don't have to be united in one government to be united in freedom. And in terms of those shifts, I think that's much more important. And as long as it's fun talking on your platform here, but there's something I think about in terms of leadership for our movement that I think is kind of unique among libertarians. And this came to me, after 10 years of activism and making every mistake in the book possible, learning all the lessons the hard way and going to jail. I realized that we're not going to wake everybody up. We're not going to get every American to read a dozen books. We're not going to agorism isn't going to do it. We're not going to end the state by everybody, engaging in some massive tax revolt. We have to get political. We have to work on withdrawing this general public consent for the state that allows it to continue to exist. And I think that the shift at that level is much more important. But when it comes to leadership, among libertarians, because our philosophy, by the way, the libertarian philosophy is compared to the alternative of statism versus libertarianism. We're talking about nonviolence. We're talking about freedom. We're talking about not doing the violence and control of the state. If anything, this is a more feminine message. The message itself of freedom, of universal nonviolence, confronting those that abridge our freedom or violate it. Of course, that might be considered the more masculine endeavor in this. But because we have this sort of live and let live message that's almost a feminine message, I think naturally a lot of libertarians are inclined, like Ron Paul says, I don't want to be president because I want to run your life. I want you to be free to run your own life. That we have this kind of hands-off approach. And I realized, no, we need to take leadership in society. Most people are never going to care about this stuff, are never going to look at it the way that we do. And that's okay. So how do we take charge? We present practical policy that immediately improves everyone's life. If you're a capitalist, you want to provide the most value to your customers as possible. So for me as a political activist, I go, all right, got to dissolve the federal government. How do we do this? Let's get it down to 50 independent states, make the Olympics that much more competitive. And how do we do this in a way that brings everybody on board? And what I'm on this tour for right now is recruiting people to be delegates to the 2018 Libertarian Party National Convention. We want to make two things happen there. We want to make localization part of the party platform. So it's not just about, I want to be president and impose my libertarian ideas on the entire country. I think that's pretty anti-libertarian myself. But instead to say, no, we want a localized government. We want it to matter in your community, what your voice and your vote are being counted for. So then I see this as an opportunity to say, look, we're taking charge. It's time for the adults in the room to come in and say, we can't do this anymore. We're not doing this. Can we get a consensus? That's how we do this in America. Like I said, turning the presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. We are going to need a supermajority, something like 60% of the American public. But most of those people aren't going to care. And for me as a political activist, it doesn't help me to get angry at them, but say, let's make it as easy as possible. Come out and vote for me once, and it might be the last time you ever have to vote in a federal election.
Gotcha. Awesome. Man, I was just having so many visuals going on. It's interesting because when you talk, I just get these visual spikes of.
Well, you want some fun visuals? Here, check this out. We're gonna turn the White House into a museum, along with the Supreme Court and the Capitol building, a museum of corruption. But then I'm going to move right away my offices by the way, we say I'm running for not president because we're not filing FEC paperwork yet. But it's actually more accurate to say that I'm running for not president, or rather running against the presidency. And so the first thing that I'm doing is resigning to become, instead of president, custodian of the federal government. And the fun visual is we move the custodial offices to the Pentagon, and we're going to be throwing some raging parties in that inner ring, that courtyard of the Pentagon right there. So you have that to look forward to with a Kokesh not presidency.
Awesome stuff, man. Man, I got so caught up in it that I almost like lost track of what I even wanted to ask. Oh yeah, now I got it. Good thing I wrote all these things down.
You're supposed to ask because you know they train us as candidates in the LP, but also when I was with the Rock Veterans Against the War, they say don't answer the question you were asked, answer the question you wish you were asked. You probably heard this before, right? So the question I'm going to hear next is, gee, Adam, how much better off would the American people be if the federal government didn't exist? No, I'm just kidding. You can go wherever you want with this. Obviously, you know, everybody gets a big pay raise. We eliminate the IRS. We eliminate all the waste. We eliminate all the regulation. There's so many benefits. It's literally impossible to count all of the ways that dissolving the federal government would benefit the American people. Good. But see, you know what? That's a good thing. Like, when I did that, I'd rather people, honestly, today, I'd rather people watch your podcast. I'd rather people listen to you and what you're doing than go back and listen to what I was doing with Adam versus the Man, or even the modern equivalent of this. Like, one of the reasons I stopped doing Adam versus Man, and I made it more about free. I was doing a week podcast. I might be bringing that back now, but I was doing 3 hours a day, mostly headline news discussion, and that's a terrible way to spend your life. You know, unless you have some other good reason to be really into it and you like looking at the world, like, that's fun, I get it. But there's so many better things you can be doing with your life. And when it comes to politics, it's like you've got a knife in your back. And by the way, I used to use a very dirty prison analogy to describe this because I've been to jail. But imagine you have a knife in your back, because that's what government is, right? It's a knife in all of our backs. And I mean, maybe more accurately, it's shackles, right? We are held back. When the average American is working for government literally half the year, it's the invisible shackles, right? We have the illusion of freedom. And I will say, we are still more free today than we ever have been in human history. Maybe with some modern caveats of the last few decades, things getting worse here in the United States. But historically speaking, we're in the most free time. So imagine this: you have a knife in your back. Do you really want to go, oh, geez, there's a knife in my back. Let me study it for a little bit. Let me see, what color is the handle? What is the blade made out of? Where was it forged? I wonder where they bought this knife. Could they make it nicer if they had some better decorations on the handle? Does it need to be sharpened? No, fuck all that. You can see, get the knife out of my back. And so for someone like you, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, you got to learn more about politics. You got to study your government. No, screw all that. You got to learn how to stop it. Like what I was able to open with in this conversation. I really appreciate that opportunity to talk about like the practical things in self-realization that you get out of this understanding. But please do not misunderstand me to say that my message is like, yeah, go read a bunch of books about politics and go learn how government works. No, don't. Learn how to help people stop government, and that's way more important.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, now I guess I'm going to ask you a more practical question on that note, and that is, what are some of the tactical things that the guys listening can start to do in their communities in order to take that fucking knife out of their back right now?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is in adjusting your lifestyle. And I know this, for a lot of people, sounds like I'm asking a lot, but I wouldn't be asking you to do it if I didn't think it would improve your life. And, especially for people who are making life decisions about school and work or entrepreneurship and where to live and thinking more free, it's don't support the system. Don't get a wage slave job. And you might say, oh, I'm going to make a sacrifice in my quality of life. And it's true. If you want to look at your life in purely materialistic ways, and of course you know better than that, but if you want to measure your life just on materialism and comfort, yeah, it's quite possible. In fact, it's likely that for most young American men, taking that corporate job, climbing the corporate ladder, at least in the short run, is going to guarantee you more comfort. Personally, I'm just as frightened of discomfort as I am of the mental discomfort of, like, being 60 years old and looking at retirement going, oh crap, I pissed my life away working for somebody else. And obviously there's that bigger picture in it. And then all the things that you can do to be an entrepreneur. I mean, with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, especially right now, there are tons of opportunities for you to start a business based on cryptocurrency, working for Bitcoin, working under the table again, not paying taxes, not having any record of it. There are tons of opportunities in the new economy for that. Now, if you have to be kind of tied into the government system, if you want to start a business, like if you want to start a brick and mortar business, sorry, it's hard. There are a lot of unlicensed businesses operating in the United States, but if you want to be, on Google and you want to have ads and you want to, you're going to have to fill out the government paperwork. You're going to have to do it that way. But you can still do as much as you can under the table, away from that.
Just want to ask you about the tax part, because I have a mentor, actually, a financial mentor, and I mean, I get where you're coming from with the taxes stuff, and he always tells me, like, you want to be paying taxes because the more taxes you're paying means the more money you're making.
No, it's the less you're making. If you are making the money, paying taxes reduces it.
I'm just saying that because I want him to hear this part. And how the hell do we, like, it takes balls to do that, and how are some tactical ways that we can avoid paying taxes? Because the guys listening right now, I don't know anybody personally that that doesn't pay taxes, or everybody doesn't want to, but I don't know anybody that's actually doing it. So how do you actually go about A, mustering the fucking balls to do that, and B, how do you actually get away with it?
Okay, so that's a good question. And when I say don't pay taxes, I don't mean go live like a monk on a mountaintop and never engage with the system and never pay a sales tax. Obviously there's some things that are kind of unavoidable. Like I still use the dollar. Just using government money when there's an alternative that's just as practical now with cryptocurrency, yeah, you're paying the inflation tax. Government money goes down in value as they inflate the monetary supply. So you're paying taxes without even knowing it. And I'm not saying that you're going to be able to avoid all that perfectly. So in my case, I have a 501c3 nonprofit. So I use the system itself to pay less in taxes. I used to do business with an LLC. So I was able to do a lot of what is, personal business as my LLC. I was doing Adam versus the Man. It was Adam versus the Man LLC. So it was a media production company. So, hey, I'm doing my show in my basement, which means my LLC pays my rent. Hey, I need to pay for my personal expenses. So, well, let's use the LLC credit card. And if they come after me, well, I was going to review that product on my show and decided not to. There were very few things just in that framework that legally, like perfectly legally, you can engineer your life to radically reduce your tax liability. For me, on the personal side of this, then, my personal income is always so low that I don't have any federal tax liability anyway. I haven't filed. The last time I filed an income tax return was in 2009 when I was getting ready to run for Congress in 2010. And back then it was like, yep, gotta check. Ron Paul wanted me to run as a Republican, so I ran as a Republican. So I had to, dance that dance and play that game. Of course, now, just to be clear, I'm a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. I was before I was a Republican, and I am running for the Libertarian Party nomination for president. So when you're doing business like that, stuff that has to be done in dollars, in mainstream stuff, if you can create a separate corporate entity. And again, like you should be talking, talk to a tax guy about this, talk to, a business consultant who can set it up and say, well, what do I have to do to arrange as much of my business affairs or my personal financial affairs to happen in one of these corporate entities so that it's no personal tax liability for me. And then it's how do I organize that corporate entity? And with a nonprofit, it's really easy. We don't have shareholders. We don't have profits. How do we make sure that that nonprofit or that LLC or whatever other corporate entity you form does not have any tax liability? So that's really easy if you have to be in the system that way. I have a lot of friends who have just opted out of living on grid in general. There's a guy, I don't want to point him out by any identifying information right now, but I have a friend from the Marines who's a mechanic. He was a mechanic in the Marine Corps, and now so he does gigs. It's a gig economy. He works for cash under the table. And it's a different lifestyle, and in some ways it's scary to think, oh, I'm not going to have a 9-to-5. I'm not going to have a paycheck. I'm not going to have a boss. But it's liberating. This guy loves living this way. So, he'll go and work at a shop, work with people who will pay him cash. He'll only work under the table. He has references, and, there are some disadvantages to this, but overall, I think the benefits outweigh the costs, and in a couple of ways. I mean, one, you have your conscience intact to know that you're not doing anything extra to support the violence of the state. You're not funding your own slavery, the violations of your freedom. At least you're not paying for that. But there are sacrifices. There are some things that you have to adjust. And I would still make the case that even financially, you're probably better off in the long run, especially knowing that the system is going to be going through some radical changes over the next couple of decades, even without me, even like my ideology, just stepping back, looking at this, like, your 401ks, your investment in the stock markets. I mean, how many times have we seen those, get ripped off anyway? Whereas saving Bitcoin, saving gold, or buying land, I think those are important things too. I guess the last thing I'll mention here in this regard, if I haven't covered anything, let me know. But in terms of investments and savings for what you want to do for your own life, I mean, especially if you're listening to this right now, the NSA's got you on a list somewhere, so don't kid yourself, right? You know, if it comes to the point where they're saying, hey, we're having to bail in, you know, we're going to bail in the banks like they did in Cyprus, where they just, hey, sorry, we're taking people's money out of their bank accounts. You know, if you're any kind of dissident or challenging authority, if you're the nail that sticks up, you're going to get hammered down first. And in that sense, I wouldn't, you know, I mean, I'm all for diversifying, but why have any of your money somewhere that you don't trust it to be safe versus somewhere that you do trust it to be safe? So in that sense, if you want a long-term value holding that's secure from the threat of government or bank confiscation, I think having real physical property, land, or precious metals. And of course, there are lots of other things that fall into that category. Ammo, guns, right, are, you know, big liquidatable things. Stocked food, although that doesn't always last. It's not the same exact store of value. But there are other like stock items that a lot of homesteaders and preppers have as their store of value. And this is not as an investment. This is a savings. But also land itself can be both savings and an investment. I think of mine more as savings. I'm trying to homestead and live there and build a base. So having that mindset gives you a better peace of mind. You know, if you think, if you own a piece of land and you have $10,000 in gold and silver buried on that land, that's a lot safer than having it in a bank. And then someday soon, that might actually be a lot more accessible too. So it's a bit of a different mentality. And I'm talking about a lot of specifics here that are definitely outside of my realm of expertise. I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert in any of these things, but I hope in presenting it with these options, your listeners are getting a chance to think through the alternate financial lifestyle that goes along with this belief system.
Totally. Wow, that's a lot of good practical tips, and definitely I feel is going to get me to start thinking, as well as the viewers, as to the practical ways in which we can start moving towards that goal of more freedom. And man, there's just so many different things I want to talk about. Globalism, you know, nationalism, globalism. Where do you stand on this? Obviously, the internet, the borders, immigration, all these different things. The world's becoming more and more connected. What are your thoughts on where we're headed in terms of that? What are your thoughts on globalism, nationalism, and all that stuff?
Well, first, my philosophy of libertarianism is based on voluntarism, that human relationships should be voluntary. And I know we kind of covered this, but I pointed out very specifically in regards to this question, because some people rail against collectivism. We only rail against forced collectivism. You know, in a world where everything is voluntary and capitalistic, you can still form companies. You wouldn't call it a corporation necessarily because it's not a legal entity like that, but you can form companies, you can form cities, you can form homeowners associations, all sorts of different ways of coming together voluntarily, some based on, you know, discrete geographic units, some just based on global networks. The reason I say this is because you use the word globalism. And again, in some ways a good thing, in some ways a bad thing. And of course, the way that most people think of it, it's a terrible thing. But there are underlying forces in that are good things. The internet is globalism, right? Where we're creating a global hive mind that transcends government, that makes governments that much more obsolete. So in that sense, yeah, the globalism that happens in forced collectivism through governments, through the United Nations, things like that, I'm absolutely 100% against. And in that sense, the consolidation of political power, absolutely 100% against. When we get political power localized to the community, you're going to see, so for America, for example, we get rid of the federal government, which, by the way, is just a layer of fat off the top. It's 3 million out of 22 million people who work for the government in America, top to bottom. So you get rid of the federal government, you get rid of state governments, you get government down to the county level. I think you're going to see law enforcement consolidate at the county level. You're not going to have these little territories like, you know, overlapping cities and counties, or maybe the counties will dissolve and you'll have, you know, city police forces. But at the same time, we're going to, first of all, we're all going to be twice as wealthy. Right now, the average American works for government literally half the year. You add up all the fees, fines, other costs of government, taxes, hidden taxes. and then obviously the direct income tax that most Americans think of as, about 30% at worst. We're going to have the resources to create better mechanisms. In a sense, we already do. And you look at the courts in America, they're a freaking disaster. And it's not just they're a disaster, it's the Justice Department, and it's a travesty of justice when the average American has no access to the system unless they have a lot of money. If you get wronged, and I can tell this from my experience, I had the motorcycle that I bought when I got home from Iraq with my deployment money got stolen and recovered, and I got a judgment for damages against the guy because it was trash, and I never saw a dime of this. The guy got to go to jail and be taken care of by the taxpayers for years, and I got screwed again as a taxpayer. Not only did he steal my bike and trash it, now the government that's supposed to help me steals from me and takes care of him in jail as opposed to, paying me back, making me whole. So to make those systems much more accessible, you're going to see all sorts of decentralized systems that may be global, right? And so just to get back to your question, the idea of concentrating power, of nationalism, of this political stuff, that's terrible. And the answer is to get government localized, respect the right of self-determination of communities and, of course, individuals. And on the global scale, let the market decide. Let it be voluntary to see what mechanisms we form in global networks or companies or organizations that serve needs that are not based in geography.
Interesting.
Did I cover that?
Yeah,
globalism. Was there something else? Question?
Yeah, I got another. Well, I have a kind of follow-up question. And I recently went to a conference about a week ago, and I saw Richard Branson talk about, entrepreneurship and whatever.
Sir Branson.
Sir Branson.
Sir.
Yeah. And he's a pretty badass dude. And but then he said something, and I'm a little bit confused, and I want to see what your thoughts are on this. He said that basically he kind of made a indirect remark towards Trump and said that, it's unfortunate that some politicians want to put borders on the world. And then he kind of said that as an entrepreneur, you want to see the world without borders. You want to see the world as one big family that you can kind of, create businesses in, and you can expand it exponentially and stuff like that. So I was wondering, is this guy talking from a business perspective? Is he just trying to build the biggest businesses he possibly can and make them global, and that's why he doesn't want borders? What are your thoughts on that mentality, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, and I think you can go both ways with this, and I don't pretend to know exactly what Richard Branson is promoting, but yeah, if you're a capitalist, you don't want restrictions to freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is essential to commerce. So we say we're going to put a government line here, and people born on one side have different privileges and people on the other side, is completely contrary to the ideals of freedom and capitalism and free markets. I actually recently debated Lauren Southern on this at FSU. It was a great time. Of course, she's advocating for socializing government borders or border security. The way I say it, if you believe in freedom, the only legitimate borders are private property borders. The borders of my property where I set the rules. If I come together with other people to form communities on private property, then we can set rules together, but it has to be based on private property, not this government enclosure. We own everything. And when I was getting ready for this debate, I came across a stunning statistic, and I saw the math backing this up. But basically, if we got rid of government borders all over the world, we allowed for freedom of movement universally, global productivity would double. You think about it, holy crap. Yeah, and it makes sense because people are able to pursue their rational self-interest. Labor is able to flow where it's needed, where it's going to be more productive. But here's the thing, we don't just go, oh yeah, of course it would be more productive if we didn't have government borders. No, twice as productive. That means for humanity as a whole to enjoy the same standard of living that we have now, we'd all have to work half as much. Or we would all double our quality of life. Take your pick. That's what government is holding us back from, just by restricting freedom of movement, not counting taxation, not counting regulations in various territories, but just by restricting the freedom of movement of labor, capital to travel to where it is needed, where the market demands it. We are cutting our productivity in half. Governments are cutting back the potential of humanity by 50%. It's staggering. And when you see that, it's hard to say, well, we need to protect ourselves from terrorism, because that's obviously a bullshit excuse to promote the government racket. The government can't protect us from terrorism, and the idea that they can seal a border for an entire country. Oh yeah, we need to protect ourselves from terrorism. Never mind that 13, 14 million people are already here illegally. Have already beat the system. No, and for the conservatives who think that the border is somehow necessary for security, I like to turn the gun argument around on them, or at least show them this inconsistency, because I'm sure you've heard of the conservative chestnut. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Well, when freedom of movement is outlawed, only outlaws will come into your country to blow you up. You won't have the good people who want to, take out your trash and mow your lawn. No, you'll have the people who want to fight the system.
Interesting. Because a lot of people that I follow also, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not like too grounded in any views right now, because I'm still exploring as much as I can. And I know that you had an interview with Gavin McInnes, and that was pretty fun to watch. And then you got guys like Milo, and then you got guys like Alex Jones, and you got Joe Rogan, and all these different guys. And a lot of them are actually for the wall. And I thought that they were on the same page as you. But what's the main difference between guys like them and guys like you? I still don't get because it's weird, because a lot of them are, like Gavin McInnes, for instance, agrees about the whole like, he has similar visions, but then there's overlaps. And I don't get the overlap. Like, why are some people into like freedom and arming yourselves and this and that, but then they want the wall? And then why are some other people like you, like, into freedom and arming yourselves, but not against the wall? Like, you know what I mean? I'm confused.
Yeah. Well, the process of becoming libertarian, or waking up, or really just realizing that you're a libertarian, because if libertarian is defined as someone who believes in the doctrine of free will, every human being with an independent consciousness is a libertarian. It's just a matter of discovering that and realizing the implications of that. And in a way, a lot of people, it's overcoming Stockholm syndrome, which is this strange human phenomenon of falling in love with your captors. And this goes back to the incident in Stockholm, Sweden in the 70s. And in modern, in the United States, it's particularly strong because we are the most propagandized population on earth, aside from the subset of the U.S. military. And so overcoming that Stockholm syndrome is more of a psychological, mental, emotional thing than an intellectual thing for a lot of people. So they're stuck in this emotional state of, but these people love us, but they're protecting us, but and it's like a rancher protects his cattle, not like they're actually providing you a protection service here, right? So to overcome that requires a certain amount of emotional freedom, where a lot of people they seem to look at freedom, but they don't understand it in a consistent way. They say, well, we should have freedom in commerce, and we should have freedom in civil liberties, and we should have freedom in business, but we shouldn't have freedom when it comes to security. And it's like, whoa, that's the most important thing. That's like, you say, oh no, we need a government monopoly for security. Well, that's how innocent people die. That's how people get screwed. That's how we end up in this situation where you're working for government half the year. Because, oh, well, if it wasn't for the government, we'd all be speaking Arabic right now, which is, of course, one of these silly fear things.
I think I got what you... Am I right if I say that you're not necessarily against the wall, but you're against the way that they're doing it, right? Which is using government to do it.
Well, I'm against where it is, I'm not, if you say the wall, if it's a wall from between the U.S. and Mexico, yeah, I'm totally against it, because I own land, right? I own a piece of physical property. I own a piece of this earth that the government acknowledges that I own. Society generally respects. I own this land. I bought it fair and square. I should be able to I have a right to invite anyone from anywhere on earth to come to my property to live on my land. And when you say I'm putting up a wall here that's covering this entire territory. What you're doing is you're setting policy on my private property. That's kind of messed up. It's very anti-freedom of you. So I don't have a problem with a wall on my private property. I don't have a problem with you putting up a wall on your private property. But when you use the government to say, well, I have a claim over this slice of the continent, I claim everything that's within these lines. No, that's illegitimate. What you're doing is anti-freedom. What you're doing is violating people's property rights, and you're violating their basic human right to freedom of movement.
So now I got even more clarity on this. So now you're saying, okay, so if people, let's say, all agreed that, like, if people that along the Mexican border and the American border all own that land and came together and said, hey, we own this land together and we want to put a wall here, and then they did it, you wouldn't be necessarily opposed to that. But you're opposed to the fact that the federal government is basically imposing like their will on that whole piece of land instead of allowing the private owners to do so.
Right, but there's a little bit of a caveat in what you just said there, because you said if all of the people who lived along the U.S.-Mexican border, right, if they all own, the thing is that you can't really do that. You can't say we own this whole strip of land, I have my 10 acres and you have your 10 acres next to your 10 acres, and we line them up in a string, and then we make a wall just on one side, and maybe we make a wall on the other side. So we got this like long, narrow strip of a compound. Well, we still have to allow people to go out, to go around it, to go, to not be restricted in their access to whatever's on the other side of our little strip of property. So realistically, if there were now, and it is a problem, right, in border states, although if you got rid of the American government and the welfare system, you wouldn't have most of these problems anyway, because people would be allowed to travel freely. If you just change the immigration laws, you wouldn't have people sneaking across, cattle ranches in South Texas. But if those cattle ranchers wanted to get together and say, hey, this is how it is right now. We have this problem. We want to do something about it. The dumbest thing they can do is let's elect President Trump. Let's get him to build a wall. Like, hello, there's no freaking way that he is going to use government to solve your problem there. And if he does, it's going to come at way too high of a cost and violate someone else's rights in an unethical way to do that. But to get to exactly the way you said it, if a bunch of cattle ranchers in South Texas said, we're forming a conglomerate for security purposes, and we are going to put up a wall around our ranches, and we are going to defend that wall, and we are going to fund it privately because we want to control who comes onto our property, absolutely 100% support that.
I see. Wow, that is, to me, probably the biggest mindset shift I've made politically in a long time, because I've been following a lot of different guys, like I said, and a lot of them were into the wall, a lot of them are into Trump, and the more I look into it, the more I see that there's just so many different nuances and things like that, and it's easy to get into the mental trap of just saying, oh, this sounds cool, and bam, and just accepting what these other guys are saying. So that was a huge shift for me.
Well, it's silly. Like, to advocate for government border security is just out of touch with basic reality. Because if a government puts up a border and tries to secure a border, you're trying to create a giant bubble where everything in this bubble is safe. First of all, that's not realistic. But because it's a government over a huge territory, they have to let people in based on their paperwork. They have to let you in if you have a passport. They have to let you in if you have a visa. They have to let you in if you jump through their hoops. And the thing is, that paperwork is always forgeable. Like, when I went to Mexico and interviewed people about this, I said, if you needed to get into the United States, how would you do it? Oh, I got a brother who's an American with a birth certificate. I just borrow his birth certificate. Yeah, you just fake the papers. It's not complicated. It's a really easy system to defeat. Government border security will always be a joke. It will always be defeatable by someone who is determined to beat it. Private security, on the other hand, can be as strict and as strong as is justified in protecting those resources. So if you've got a cattle ranch where you're making, $10 million a year, you want to invest $1 million in security, you're going to get $1 million worth of security. If you turn to government, you're going to get $0 worth of security, because you're just going to get your freedoms violated. You're not going to get set the terms of that. And in terms of anything that you could rely on, obviously, you can't rely on government for anything, except screwing people over. It's very consistent about that.
That is crazy. And wow, it truly shows me like the Yeah, the Stockholm syndrome. You said it best.
So about that, I want just so your viewers know too about this, that like I'm coming at this from a position like, well, here's how it's done, and I'm not perfectly mentally free either. And I'm really just glad you mentioned that, Max, in those terms, like the political Stockholm syndrome. I still got it, to a small degree. I should say I don't have the Stockholm syndrome. I'm over that. But I have remnants of the conditioning, and I have to catch myself. A lot of the times, it's the language that we use. We say our government. It's not your government. What do you mean? You own this government? No, it's not yours at all. The American government. We invaded Iraq. You didn't go to Iraq. And it's like Doug Stanhope, a great libertarian comic. He loves to say, nationalism, patriotism makes you take pride in shit that you've never done and take credit for things that you didn't, have anything to do with, and hate people who you've never met before. It's just this ridiculous conditioning that does really require a conscientious, deliberate effort to get over. Sometimes the people around me think they'll get pissed off at me or think I'm being silly because I'll interrupt in conversation. Someone will say, well, when we invaded Iraq, I'm like, oh no, I was there. I can say we invaded Iraq. I was part of the military. You were not. You were an innocent bystander. Stop identifying with your government. Stop identifying with your captors. That is the ultimate expression of Stockholm syndrome, when someone's got a gun to your head and says, give me all your money and I'm going to use you as a hostage. And you say, gee, I don't know if that's such a good idea for you. We should negotiate with the police differently. We should be asking for more money if you're going to give me it's just, no, break free of this. These are not people who you need to associate with psychologically, to give over your sovereignty mentally as an individual and say, oh yes, we are the American government. No, that's a really dangerous Amero fantasy land kind of mythological crap story that's just going to get more people hurt.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to end it with one or two last questions here. We're good on time, right?
I got to be waiting for him, but yeah, we should wrap this up, man. I'm really enjoying this. I appreciate your perspective on these things.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'll just end it with this then. What are some, and I know you said you didn't want people to start observing the knife and getting into all the details of it and all that, but for the guys that actually do want to observe the knife a little bit and just kind of get into more touch with maybe some literature or stuff like that, do you have any good books that you would recommend?
Well, hey, I wrote a book for that exact purpose, and it's free. It's called Freedom. And you know what? I'm really it's funny. I'm at a friend's house right now, so I don't have my own book handy. But I can I'll do two things for you because I got my card here. There's the logo, Freedom. It's free. Look at this. We're gonna do download for free at thefreedomline.com. So when I was in jail for civil disobedience in D.C., people sent me all the best books on the subject of freedom, and I decided that I would become the very best rip-off artist the freedom movement has ever known, and I took all of their best ideas and none of their bad qualities and condensed them down into one really easy to read and understand 100-page book. If you read this, you'll never have to read another book about government or politics again. It's like the code behind the Matrix. And I wrote it to be the ultimate red pill. And I can say humbly that I succeeded because I had a lot of help. We crowdsourced the process. We had over 300 contributors to this. And it really is something that meets that purpose, but also as a way to share this message. And I will say one thing that I left out earlier when you were asking for how can people apply this in their lives. And this is a little bit out of the realm of immediate self-improvement or lifestyle, but most people who come to this understanding want to share it, because the more people understand this, the more free you will be. The more society understands these things, the more free all of us will be. Of course, the most important thing in making this progress towards a free society is to get political, to dissolve the federal government, to dissolve the state governments. And I don't mean get involved. I mean, yes, if you want to get involved, if this is something that's enjoyable for you, I want to help people do that with this campaign. We want to maximize the effect of your efforts. If you can help me get on that third podium in 2020 and challenge the old parties, that's what we're working towards. We're asking people to show up in the LP state conventions, to go to the LP National Convention in 2018 in New Orleans. It's going to be a lot of fun, really big party. So if you want to come and be a part of that, please join us. The way to get involved is thefreedomline.com. Is that going to come in focus eventually? There it is, thefreedomline.com. And if you want to go to the forums under your state, sign up, give us your information there. We'll be in contact with you, hold your hand, and make it as easy as possible. And again, like with the American people, we don't want them to read a dozen books. We don't want them to, lose sleep over this. We don't want them to join us fighting the system. We want to make it as easy as possible for everyone. Government is not going to end with some big fight and revolution. It's going to end when enough people can go, we don't have to do this central violent control anymore. We don't have to feminize all of society and make us all betas. No, we can all be the alphas of our own lives and reclaim that. So one book, freedom, get it, move on, go back, live a good life. And if you want to help me with what I'm doing, we got lots of wonderful ways to plug you in. And Max, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your audience and spread this message to a different group of people, especially in this context. Because, like I said earlier, you shouldn't make your life about politics unless you're like me and you're like, I got to be an activist, or you're doing something specific with it. But don't read the news for 2 or 3 hours every day. Don't feel like you have to get involved or you're a bad person. No, enjoy life, live more free, live with this understanding. And for me, because I've been to war, because I've seen the pain and suffering firsthand, to me, the value that we provide to the world in terms of alleviating suffering is so much that this is what I'm compelled to do with my life. But I hope that you'll at least take the time, read the book, understand this message, and apply it to your life how you see fit, because I guarantee it'll make you live that much more free and that much more happy.
And on that note, we can end it. Adam, this was a mind-blowing time. I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. And I hope that the guys listening are going to take action, get the book. Let's start moving forward. Let's start being more aggressive and taking on more leadership roles, like you said. And also enjoying life and living more free. Adam, this was a blast. Really appreciated this. And hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Thank you very much, brother.
Take care.